He was just a starving orphan with nothing left to lose. But when 12-year-old Tobias found that dying native girl by the creek, his next decision would change two worlds forever. What happened next proves that sometimes the smallest hands carry the biggest hearts. The sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty settlement as Tobias Crow pressed his face against the general store window. His stomach had been empty for 2 days, and the jerky hanging behind the glass looked like salvation. Homer Gentry, the store owner, caught sight of the boy's desperate eyes and rapped his knuckles hard against the window. Tobias jerked back, his bare feet stumbling on the wooden planks. Homer stepped outside, his belly straining against his vest. "Get away from my store, you little pest. Ain't got nothing for beggars." Tobias wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. "I got 3 cents, mister. Just need some hardtack." 3 cents? Homer's laugh was sharp and cruel. "That won't buy you the wrapping paper." He grabbed Tobias by the shoulder and shoved him toward the edge of town. "Go find yourself a ditch to die in. Stop scaring away my paying customers." The boy stumbled but didn't fall. He'd learned long ago that falling only made things worse. Instead, he walked toward the creek that wound behind the settlement, where the cottonwoods offered shade and the water ran clear. At least there he could drink his fill and maybe catch a minnow or two. But as he approached the water's edge, something made him freeze. There, half hidden behind a fallen log, lay a small figure. At first he thought it was a discarded bundle of clothes, but then he saw the long black hair and the rise and fall of shallow breathing. It was a girl, maybe 10 years old, with bronze skin and intricate beadwork on her dress. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, and her lips were cracked and pale. Tobias had seen enough dying animals to recognize the signs. She wouldn't last much longer without help. His heart hammered against his ribs. Everyone in the settlement knew the rules about natives. They weren't welcome in town, and getting involved with their kind meant trouble. But as he knelt beside her, the girl's eyes fluttered open, dark and filled with pain that mirrored his own. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped her lips. Tobias looked back toward town, then at the girl again. He knew what he had to do, even if it cost him everything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out those 3 precious cents. Homer's hardtack wouldn't save this girl's life, but there was something else in that store that might. Something that would use up every penny he had, and probably get him beaten besides. But as the girl's breathing grew weaker, Tobias made a choice that would ripple through both their worlds in ways he could never imagine. Tobias ran back toward the general store, his bare feet slapping against the hard-packed earth. His 3 cents felt burning hot in his palm, but he knew it wasn't enough for what he needed. The girl required real medicine, not just food. She needed the bottle of wound salve that Homer kept locked behind the counter, the kind that cost 50 cents and healed cuts clean. When he burst through the store's door, Homer looked up from his ledger with pure irritation. "I thought I told you to get lost, boy." "Please, mister." Tobias's voice cracked as he placed his 3 cents on the counter. "There's a hurt girl by the creek. She's gonna die without medicine." Homer's eyes narrowed. "What girl? You talking about some native?" Tobias nodded, and Homer's expression turned from irritation to anger. "You little fool. You want me to waste good medicine on one of them savages?" He swept the coins off the counter, sending them scattering across the floor. "Get out before I take a strap to you." But Tobias didn't move. Instead, he thought about the girl's eyes, so full of pain and fear. He thought about all the times he'd been hungry and hurt and alone, with nobody willing to help. His hand moved to the small knife on his belt, the only thing of value he owned. It had belonged to his father, the only memory he had left. What about this? Tobias pulled out the knife, its bone handle worn smooth from years of use. "It's worth something." Homer's greedy eyes fixed on the blade. It was good steel, well made, probably worth $2 to the right buyer. "That native girl mean that much to you, boy?" Tobias's throat felt tight, but he nodded. "She's dying." Homer snatched the knife and examined it carefully. "Fine, but don't come crying to me when her people come looking for trouble." He reached under the counter and pulled out a small bottle of wound salve and a roll of clean bandages. "And, boy, if anyone asks where you got this medicine, you never saw me." Tobias grabbed the supplies and ran back to the creek, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and loss. The knife had been his only protection, his only connection to a father he barely remembered. But as he knelt beside the girl again, he knew he'd made the right choice. Working carefully, he cleaned her wound and applied the salve. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, but her breathing seemed to grow stronger. Tobias gave her water from the creek, holding her head gently as she drank. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the girl's eyes opened fully for the first time. She looked at Tobias with confusion, then recognition. She tried to sit up, but he gently pressed her back down. "Easy now," he whispered. "You're safe." But even as he said the words, Tobias heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of horses approaching fast, and the war cries of native warriors echoing across the plains. They were coming for their missing daughter, and they would find her in the care of a white boy with medicine he couldn't possibly afford. The thunder of hooves grew louder as 6 warriors crested the hill above the creek. Tobias's first instinct was to run, but the girl was too weak to move. He positioned himself between her and the approaching riders, his small frame trembling but determined. The lead warrior dismounted with fluid grace, his face painted with streaks of red and black. Eagle feathers adorned his long hair, and a tomahawk hung at his side. This had to be someone important, maybe even a chief. His dark eyes scanned the scene, taking in the wounded girl, the medicine bottle, and the scrawny white boy who dared to stand in his path. The girl spoke weakly in her native tongue, her voice barely audible. But whatever she said made the warrior's expression shift from fury to something else entirely. He knelt beside her, his weathered hands gentle as he examined her bandaged wound. "Ayanna," he whispered, and Tobias heard the deep love in that single word. This wasn't just any warrior. This was her father. The chief looked up at Tobias, his eyes searching. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "You did this? You helped my daughter?" Tobias nodded, his mouth too dry to speak. He expected anger, maybe violence. Everyone said the natives were savages who killed white children without mercy. But instead, the chief's eyes moved to the empty medicine bottle, then back to Tobias's threadbare clothes and hollow cheeks. "Where did you get medicine?" the chief asked. "You are just a boy, a poor boy." Tobias found his voice at last. "I traded for it. She was dying, and I couldn't just watch." The chief studied him for a long moment, then spoke rapidly to his warriors in their language. 2 of them dismounted and carefully lifted Ayanna, preparing to take her home. But the chief remained, his gaze never leaving Tobias. "What did you trade?" he asked quietly. Tobias looked down at his empty hands. "My knife. It was my father's, only thing I had left of him." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. The other warriors had stopped their preparations, sensing the weight of this moment. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the whole world was listening. The chief reached into a leather pouch at his belt and pulled out something that made Tobias's eyes widen. It was his father's knife. But how could that be? Then he realized what must have happened. The chief had been to town, had seen Homer with the blade, had bought it back. "A boy who gives up everything to save a stranger's child," the chief said slowly. "This boy has honor. This boy has heart." He held out the knife. "My people have a debt." But as Tobias reached for his father's blade, a commotion erupted from the direction of town. Homer gentry was riding hard toward them, followed by a group of armed settlers. Their faces were twisted with anger and fear, and their weapons glinted in the fading light. "There they are," Homer shouted. "The boy's with them. Probably been working with the savages all along." The settlers reined in their horses 20 yards away, rifles raised and ready. Homer's face was red with excitement and greed as he pointed at the scene before him. "See there? That orphan boy's been conspiring with them. Probably planned this whole thing." Chief Kestrel stood slowly, his hand resting on his tomahawk. His warriors flanked him, forming a protective circle around Ayanna and Tobias. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm, and Tobias found himself caught between 2 worlds that seemed destined to destroy each other. "Now hold on there, Chief," called out Samuel Reed, the settlement's unofficial leader. "We don't want any trouble. Just hand over the boy and we'll call it even." "The boy did nothing wrong," Chief Kestrel replied, his voice steady as granite. "He saved my daughter's life." Homer spat into the dirt. "Don't you believe his lies? That little snake's been planning to rob my store for weeks. Probably told them savages where to find our supplies." Tobias felt his face burn with shame and anger. "That ain't true. I never—" "Shut your mouth." "Boy," Homer snarled, "we know what you are. Orphan trash with no loyalty to your own kind." But Chief Kestrel stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of Tobias. "This child has more honor than all of you. He gave everything he had to save a stranger. What have any of you sacrificed for another? The settlers shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Samuel Reed's rifle wavered slightly. Look, we appreciate what the boy might have done, but he's our responsibility. Hand him over, and we'll discipline him proper. Discipline? The chief's voice carried a dangerous edge. For showing mercy? For choosing compassion over hatred? He turned to face the settlers fully. You call yourselves civilized, yet you would punish kindness. Ayanna stirred in her warrior's arms and spoke weakly to her father. Whatever she said made his expression soften for a moment, then harden with new resolve. He looked back at Tobias, then at the armed men who wanted to drag the boy away. My daughter says the boy wept as he cleaned her wounds, the chief said quietly. She says he spoke gently to her, told her she would be safe. This is the child you call savage? Homer's patience snapped. Enough talk. Boy belongs to us, and we're taking him. He raised his rifle, but before he could aim, something extraordinary happened. Every warrior in the chief's band had an arrow nocked and drawn in one fluid motion. The settlers found themselves staring down a wall of deadly points, each aimed with deadly precision. But it was Chief Kestrel's next words that truly changed everything. Any man who harms this boy harms my family, he declared, his voice carrying across the creek like thunder. He is under the protection of our tribe now. Touch him, and you answer to all of us. The silence that followed was deafening. Homer's rifle trembled in his hands as he realized he was outnumbered and outmatched. Samuel Reed looked between his men and the warriors, calculating odds that didn't favor him. But Tobias stepped forward, his young voice cutting through the tension. Wait, he said, looking up at the chief. I can't let you fight because of me. Too many people will get hurt. The chief looked down at him with something like wonder in his eyes. Even now, you think of others before yourself. As the standoff continued, Ayanna whispered something else to her father. His eyes widened, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Chief Kestrel smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, and it made several settlers take an involuntary step backward. Chief Kestrel's smile sent a chill through the assembled settlers. He spoke briefly to his daughter, then addressed the armed men with deadly calm. My daughter has told me something very interesting about your medicine man, he said, nodding toward Homer. She was conscious when the boy brought her healing supplies. She heard everything. Homer's face went pale. What's he talking about? I don't know nothing about. She heard you demand the boy's most precious possession for medicine, the chief continued. A knife that belonged to his dead father. You took advantage of a child's desperation to line your own pockets. Samuel Reed looked confused. Homer, what's he saying? But Homer was backing his horse away, his eyes darting between the warriors and his fellow settlers. It's just business. The boy wanted to trade, so we traded. You charged a starving orphan full price for medicine to save a dying child, Chief Kestrel said, his voice growing harder with each word. Then you brought armed men to punish him for showing mercy. The chief reached into his pouch again and pulled out not just Tobias's knife, but a leather bag that clinked with coins. I went to your store after I found my daughter. I paid your price for this blade, and do you know what your medicine man did then? He told me exactly where to find the thieving orphan who had conspired with savages. The settlers were beginning to look at Homer with new eyes. Samuel Reed lowered his rifle completely. Homer, please tell me you didn't. The boy's nothing but trouble, Homer shouted desperately. He'll bring them all down on us. Mark my words. This will end badly for everyone. But Chief Kestrel wasn't finished. He walked slowly toward Homer's horse, and the store owner's rifle shook violently in his hands. A man who profits from a child's love for his father, the chief said quietly. A man who turns mercy into suspicion. This man has no honor. Without warning, the chief grabbed Homer's rifle barrel and yanked it from his grasp. The weapon flew through the air and splashed into the creek. Homer nearly fell from his saddle, catching himself at the last moment. You will not touch this boy, the chief declared. He is worth more than all of you combined. Samuel Reed cleared his throat nervously. Now, Chief, we can work this out. No need for anyone to get hurt. The boy can come back to town, and we'll make sure Homer here treats him fair. Chief Kestrel turned to look at Tobias, who stood frozen between the two groups. The boy's eyes were wide with confusion and fear, but also something else. Hope, perhaps, that someone finally saw him as more than just unwanted trouble. The choice is yours, young warrior, the chief said gently. But know this, my people do not forget those who show kindness to our children. As Tobias opened his mouth to respond, the sound of more horses approaching echoed across the plains. But this time, they were coming from the direction of the native camp, and there were many more of them. A line of 20 warriors appeared on the horizon, riding at full gallop toward the creek. The settlers' faces went white with terror, and several of them wheeled their horses around ready to flee. But Chief Kestrel raised his hand, and his approaching warriors slowed to a stop just beyond arrow range. "They will not attack," the chief said calmly, "unless you force them to." Samuel Reed's voice cracked with fear. "What do you want from us?" The chief looked down at Tobias, who stood small and trembling between two worlds that seemed ready to tear each other apart. "I want justice for this boy, and I want my people to see the face of true courage." He called out in his native tongue, and one of the approaching warriors rode forward alone. As he drew closer, Tobias could see this was an older man, his hair streaked with gray and his face marked with the wisdom lines of many winters. "This is Running Bear, our storyteller," Chief Kestrel explained. "He will witness what happens here today, so that our children's children will know the truth." The old storyteller dismounted and walked to where Ayanna lay in her warrior's arms. He examined her bandaged wound, then turned to study Tobias with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Running Bear spoke in the native language, his words flowing like music. When he finished, Chief Kestrel nodded solemnly. "He says the spirits whispered to him in a dream last night," the chief translated. "They told him a lost child would save one of our own, and that this act would change the path of both our peoples." Homer snorted with desperate bravado. "Dreams and spirits. It's all heathen nonsense." But Running Bear walked directly to Homer and spoke in perfect English, his voice carrying the weight of years. "You call us heathens, yet your own holy book speaks of showing mercy to orphans and strangers. This child lived those words while you counted coins." The storyteller then approached Tobias and knelt before him, studying the boy's face with gentle intensity. "Tell me, young one, why did you save our daughter? Did you hope for reward?" Tobias shook his head. "No, sir. She was hurt and scared. I know what that feels like." Running Bear smiled and placed a weathered hand on Tobias's shoulder. "In our tribe, there is no higher honor than protecting those who cannot protect themselves. You have shown the heart of a true warrior." The old man stood and spoke again to Chief Kestrel, who listened intently before nodding. Then the chief turned to address both the settlers and his own warriors. "Running Bear has reminded me of an old tradition," he said. "When someone saves the life of a chief's child, they become family, not by blood, but by choice, by honor." Samuel Reed found his voice. "What exactly are you saying?" Chief Kestrel looked directly at Tobias. "I am saying that this boy, who has no family, now has one if he chooses. My daughter lives because of his sacrifice. My people would be honored to call him brother." The weight of the moment settled over everyone present. Tobias felt his heart hammering as he realized what was being offered. A home, a family, people who saw value in kindness rather than profit. But before he could respond, Ayanna stirred in her carrier's arms and spoke weakly. Her father leaned down to listen, then straightened with surprise and something that might have been joy. "My daughter has made a request," the chief announced. "She wants to give the boy something as thanks for saving her life, something that will change everything." Ayanna whispered something to the warrior carrying her, who gently set her down so she could stand on unsteady legs. Despite her weakness, she walked slowly toward Tobias, her dark eyes bright with determination. From around her neck, she lifted a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. Chief Kestrel's eyes widened in surprise. "Ayanna, no, that is too precious." But the girl shook her head firmly and continued toward Tobias. When she reached him, she held out the pouch with trembling hands. "For you," she said in careful English, "because you gave everything." Tobias looked at the pouch, then at the chief. "What is it?" Running Bear stepped forward, his voice filled with reverence. "That pouch contains sacred stones from the mountain where our people first touched the earth. It has been in the chief's family for 7 generations. It is," he paused, searching for the right words, "it is a map to something beyond price." The settlers leaned forward despite themselves, their greed overcoming their fear. Homer's eyes glittered with avarice. "What kind of map?" Chief Kestrel looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Ayanna, are you certain? Once this gift is given, it cannot be taken back." The girl nodded firmly, then pressed the pouch into Tobias's hands. The leather was warm and smooth, and he could feel small objects shifting inside. Whatever was in there felt heavy with importance. "The stones will lead you to a hidden valley," the chief explained slowly. "A place where our ancestors gathered the sacred metals. There is enough there to make a poor boy wealthy beyond imagination. But more importantly, it is a place of peace, where no violence can touch you." Samuel Reed's mouth fell open. The other settlers exchanged glances full of barely contained greed, but it was Homer who spoke first, his voice shaking with desperate desire. "Now wait just a minute. That boy's just a worthless orphan. He don't deserve no treasure." Chief Kestrel's expression turned dangerous. "He deserves it because he did not seek it, because he gave freely, without thought of reward." But Homer wasn't listening. His mind was racing with visions of gold and silver, of wealth beyond his wildest dreams. "There's got to be some mistake. The boy's nothing special. I'm the one who provided the medicine, for a price that broke his heart," Running Bear said quietly, while he gave freely of his poverty. Tobias looked down at the pouch in his hands, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of what was happening. Part of him wanted to give it back, to say he didn't deserve such a gift. But another part, the part that had been hungry and cold and alone for so long, whispered that maybe he did deserve kindness after all. "There's one more thing," Chief Kestrel said, his voice carrying a note of warning. "The map only works for one whose heart is pure. Try to use it with greed or evil intent, and the stones will lead you nowhere but to your own destruction." As the chief spoke these words, Homer's face twisted with calculation and barely controlled rage. The sight made Tobias's blood run cold, because he recognized that look. It was the same expression Homer wore when he was planning something cruel. The standoff at the creek ended with unexpected gentleness. Chief Kestrel personally helped Tobias onto one of the warriors' horses, while Running Bear carefully secured the sacred pouch around the boy's neck. Ayanna, despite her weakness, smiled at Tobias with the kind of pure gratitude that made his chest feel warm and tight. "You will always have a home with us," the chief told him as they prepared to leave. "But the choice of when to come must be yours." Samuel Reed cleared his throat nervously. "What about the boy's, his legal situation? He's technically a ward of the settlement." Chief Kestrel's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Show me the papers that prove you own a human being. Show me the law that says kindness is a crime." The settlers had no answer for that. One by one, they began to turn their horses back toward town, their shoulders slumped with defeat and shame. All except Homer, who sat rigid in his saddle, his eyes fixed on the pouch around Tobias's neck with naked hunger. As the native warriors prepared to escort Tobias to their camp, Running Bear approached him one final time. "The stones will show you the way when your heart is ready," he said quietly. "But remember, young warrior, the greatest treasure is not what you find in the earth but what you build with your hands and heart." 3 months later, Tobias had indeed found the hidden valley the stones revealed. But it wasn't gold or silver that made him wealthy. The valley was perfect for farming, with rich soil and a year-round spring. Chief Kestrel helped him stake a legal claim to the land, and soon, Tobias was growing crops that fed both the settlement and the native camp. The boy who had once begged for scraps now employed a dozen workers during harvest season. He built a small but comfortable house near the creek where he'd first found Ayanna, and every evening he could see the smoke from the tribal fires in the distance. Homer Gentry never stopped trying to discover the location of Tobias's valley. He followed the boy countless times, hired trackers, even attempted to steal the sacred stones. But every path he took led him in circles, deeper into badlands that nearly cost him his life. The stones, it seemed, kept their promise about pure hearts. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Ayanna visited Tobias at his farm. She was fully recovered now, strong and bright, with her father's wisdom and her own fierce kindness. She brought with her a gift, a small sapling from the sacred grove where her people held their most important ceremonies. "So you will always remember," she said as they planted it together near his front porch, "that some gifts are worth more than all the gold in the mountains." Tobias smiled as he patted soil around the young tree's roots. The orphan boy who had given everything for a stranger now had more than he'd ever dreamed possible. Not just wealth, but something far more precious. A family that chose him, a community that respected him, and the knowledge that kindness, freely given, always finds its way back home. As the sun set over his valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Tobias could hear the distant sound of drums from the tribal camp. welcoming another day of peace between two peoples brought together by the courage of a child who chose love over fear. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where honor and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.